Hi, my name is Reed Jones. I'm a user researcher at Zoox, and I have the fun privilege of being able to work on autonomous vehicles. It's a super interesting and complex space, and it's a space where collaboration is fundamentally required. And I want when I say collaboration, and this is something I'd like to talk about today, is I want to talk about like not just how do we get people in a room and kind of try to get alignment or get people on our side, but by collaboration, what I want to look at are what are the ways that we can powerfully and meaningfully bring people into our process so that they can help us really do the best work that we can and solve problems that maybe we couldn't or maybe not in the innovative ways that would be possible if we had more diverse thought in the room. So I should start off by acknowledging that this is the way that I work. This is the process and a couple of the techniques that I like to leverage. It does not mean that this is going to work for everybody. It's not going to be the best new thing that's going to be across the industry. So like it may not be product, UX, like different people may adopt parts of it, but maybe not the whole thing. And that's what I really wanted to kind of get to is this idea that when I'm kind of sharing these things, my hope is that you actually kind of take pieces of it, like figure out what pieces of it really you can leverage and kind of like add into your practice is kind of like an additional salt or additional spice that's really going to be able to take your projects a bit further. Even if someone was to largely adopt what I'm kind of suggesting whole cloth and like really try to bring as much as possible into their process. My hope is that you'll augment it a little bit so that way you can get the best out of it and like really kind of make it fit your environment or the project you're working on, or even you as a person to really make that kind of match happen. And that might mean a little bit of editing and trimming, even if a lot of it makes sense for you. What I hope that everyone takes away from this is, or anyone that's watching this, everyone's not going to watch it, but anyone that's watching this, I hope there's 4 things that you kind of take away is one, I just really want to kind of stress or put emphasis on the point of why is it so important to have a diverse group of people in the room so that way we are leveraging the best knowledge possible. I want to talk a little bit about like, what does it mean to really collaborate it? I started talking about it a little bit earlier, but really I want to talk about like, why is it important and how do you do it? Like, what do you need to do as an individual to make this happen? And then lastly, I would like to walk through a couple techniques that I believe really can be leveraged to bring people into the process and make it a collaborative environment where you can get the most from this diverse group that's really learning to collaborate together. Like you can get the most out of it. The place I would like to start is with this concept called shared knowledge. So with shared knowledge, it's this idea that the knowledge in the room that is most likely to be talked about, the most likely to be shared, and even like really be agreed upon is the knowledge that's already shared by the group as a whole. So what that means is when you have 4 people in the room, they're holding a little bit back and the knowledge is kind of out there and being discussed and kind of brought up, and people that they feel they can contribute to is the safe knowledge that everybody kind of holds and is kind of great to have. It feels good and it's probably the most comfortable and it feels at the time the logical way to go. The problem with it is when you have 4 people in the room, you're sharing one set of knowledge, and that's the same knowledge that you'd be sharing if you had 3 people in the room. And if you're really keeping it down to just what's kind of common, it would be the same as with just 2 people in the room, or even that one person in the room, they already have the knowledge that if it's only the shared knowledge. So really by adding people to the room, we're not bringing anything at all to the table if that's what we're focusing on. So what we have to do is, as individuals, when we kind of enter a room and we're looking to collaborate, like kind of starting with the individual and kind of working out, you really need to think about your unique contributions. What are the things from your discipline that are an interesting perspective that the group's going to gain from? What are the things from the discipline that are valuable for everyone to kind of like bounce ideas off of, or kind of like challenge and kind of like try to augment with the knowledge they have? Is it your discipline? Is it your education background, your life experiences? Maybe it's just other interests that you have that you can bring to the table that are new information that the team can leverage to kind of get new insights. If you have those thoughts that are in the back of your mind, or you hear that voice, ask that question. Raise it in a room so that way the group can try to digest it and wrestle with it a little bit. Now, bringing that information to the knowledge, what that begins to do is, when you're bringing that perspective to the room, we literally see two things. One, we see the knowledge grow. So each person that we're bringing into the room, we're seeing the group as a whole has more knowledge. I do believe that there's also a compounding effect, that when you bring two people with different experiences and different perspectives into the room, and they're both adding knowledge to the table, what happens is that people are able to have a stronger understanding, or they're able to maybe arrange the thoughts in a way that they wouldn't have been able to on their own, because they're not playing different pieces. If you can kind of think about maybe like a musical group, like an orchestra, or even a rock band, the members of the group that you bring to the table, the instruments that are played, are really going to change the sound, because with each person that comes in, they can begin to play with each other and play off each other. And if you have a piano, you may have one direction, but if it's just guitar and bass, you'll have a new direction. So each of those are going to kind of create a new space. And that's what we want, is in addition to like bringing your knowledge, we want to be able to leverage each other's kind of like the combination of knowledge. Now, what's important in the next step is, this is great that we're bringing our knowledge. And I really want to emphasize that I want you bringing that knowledge, because that's going to be the first step to make collaboration valuable. The next thing that we have to do is really become detached, or kind of let go of our ideas a little bit and allow them to become the group's ideas. Really kind of try to put them on the table to be evaluated and used by the group. The reason that this is important is, when you hold your ideas too closely, and when you try to protect them and really keep them safe for yourself, what you end up doing is you make it so that nobody can challenge the idea to test it out. Nobody can try to critique it to see if there's value in changing and adjusting it. They can't add to it, and ultimately they can't own it. And if they're not owning the ideas, what that's happening is really you're just kind of protecting your ideas, and you're really kind of pushing your ideas forward into the group. And we get ourselves into the same situation of, if we didn't invite people into the room, our idea would be the lead. So really it's kind of the same situation. So we got to move from having everybody's ideas held on their own and really trying to like move them to a group knowledge. So these are the two kind of background spaces that I want. So like now we're in a space where we are individually bringing our own knowledge, like we're bringing what we can add. We're bringing the value that we can bring as an individual. We're also being detached, so it becomes the group's ideas. We're letting all of these ideas kind of mingle together and be together. And one of the other reasons that this is important is, when you hold an idea too closely, and that what may happen is, when you're kind of sharing these ideas, the collective knowledge of the group may decide to go in a way that doesn't fully support your idea. And I think we have a tendency to really try to protect our idea and say, like, you know what, I know I'm right. I think I'm going in the right direction. But I want to challenge that. And what I want you to actually start thinking about is, how do you hold both things in your mind at the same time? How do you still love and hold your idea like your precious baby, your precious thing? At the same time, how do you wholeheartedly support the idea that the collective has got behind? And the reason it becomes important is that sometimes these ideas don't work out. And sometimes they don't work out because they weren't meant to, and it just wasn't timing or whatever it might be. The challenge is, it's hard to know if it is because the idea wasn't solid or like timed well, or if it wasn't fully supported, or someone was kind of undermining it. And I don't know of any group that I've ever worked with that has gone with the direction of like, you know what, we just had a bad idea. If there's a lack of alignment, I think there's always the suggestion of like, well, we just didn't have enough alignment. So it's difficult, but I want to encourage you to take the next step of like supporting ideas, not just, and I think this is what it means to collaborate. When the group comes together and really agrees that this is the thing that we're going to do, is that's what you move forward with, and you try to make it successful, own it, and like make it feel like it's something that you want as a group to be successful. It doesn't degrade your idea anyway. Your idea can still be wonderful and radiant and valuable, but you don't have to worry about it being something that's going to be discarded or something like that. It can keep its life. And if the group's idea doesn't work out, you always have it to fall back that you can come back and say like, hey, can we reconsider this? So we've kind of set the stage for the environment. And I also want to acknowledge that outside of the collaborative space, it's so important to be building the relationships and kind of like really leveraging your soft skills to build those things and understand where people are coming from. That's a little bit side out of this talk. This is much more like strictly in the collaboration space, but that's definitely a space to be working on. And there's some talks about that. So I really look at that, leveraging that so that that you're getting people in the right mindset when they're coming in the door. So now let's talk a little bit about the ideas. So like now that you have everybody in the right space and they're in the mental space that you want them in, how do we transition them to the point where we can start generating new ideas? So I want you to imagine, so it's like researchers' favorite words. I want you to imagine that you're in a room. And on one side of the room, there are 3 light switches. And way over on the other side of the room, there's a door. Outside that door, there's a light. And here's your challenge. What I want you to do is try to understand which switches control which lights. Now, there's some restrictions. You can't see the lights from inside the door, or inside the room. Like with the door closed, you can't see it. And you only get to open the door once. And once you go out, you can't make any changes. So I would like you to take 3 minutes to kind of solve this problem. And my hope is that you actually take time, grab your piece of paper, think this through, and you pause. Now, for those that may not have, or even those who did, welcome back, and that are kind of moving on. My hope is what you're doing is that you're thinking about the tools that are available to you. And when we're thinking about the tools that are available to us, the first thing we can think of is that we have those 3 light switches. In addition to them, we have the door and we have the lights. This is it. Nothing else, no windows, nothing. This is all that we have. And this is where a lot of problems come to us. And some even people try to problem solve right here. They just look at this and they try to put the pieces together. And this is where I think a lot of us find our products in the experiences we're trying to design and build just at this level. And what I'd like us to do is actually take a moment to break it apart and say, well, we actually have a little more of this. If we just think about the pieces that we have, for instance, the switches, the light switches have 2 states. They have an on state and an off state. In addition to that, the door has 2 states. It has open and closed. And then the lights have 2 states, on and off. So right now we've already multiplied, we've doubled the amount of tools that we actually have available to us just by thinking it through it a little bit and giving things a little more definition, breaking it apart. And it doesn't mean that they're all useful to us. They may not be. They may not be all valuable, but they can be. We also have a little bit more than that. If we continue to think about what we have in the lights themselves, is what they do is they disperse energy. So one of the things that we're going to have is the light. So that's something that we could potentially use. And here is I'd like to take a dramatic pause because I think I may have led you some up to the point where you're kind of understanding, or maybe some of you are beginning to make the next leap. But this is an example of kind of like really taking a look at things and really breaking them apart to say, okay, what's here? What do we have? Because the other piece that we're missing that we have available to us is heat. Heat is a disbursement of energy. Now, if these are LED bulbs, or if you've only known LED bulbs, my example may kind of break down a little bit, but I hope you follow it through that we have these pieces. And we could continue. We could begin to break down the door itself and think that it's wood, it has a knob, it has a keyhole, and like all these kind of pieces. There's a threshold here where as you begin to break things down, that you may begin to say, okay, I think we may have enough. Like we've gone a little bit deeper by actually taking it apart and just say, actually, like, what does this have in it? Oh, the other thing I meant to mention, we also have the relationship between the switches and the lights themselves. That's a relationship. As we began to break it down, that's something else we can think about. But you can see, like, we break these down and we begin to think about them in parts. And we can use these now to think of things in a new way. And we don't have to go all the way. So what I would suggest we do is what we can do is we can leave the switch on. Let's go with the left switch. Let's go with the left switch and leave it on for 10 minutes. And after that 10 minutes, let's go to the right one, the far right one, and turn it on. And right away, go out the door. And what we will see is the one with the light on. Let's imagine it's the one on the left. That's controlled by the right switch. We know that because it has a light admitting to it, and that's the one that's on. We know it. The next thing that we can do is we can reach out and we can touch the bulb. If that bulb is warm, then what we know is that one is controlled by the left because it is still radiating the heat from being left on. So now we know it's left, leaving that cold, dark switch for the middle one. And we've kind of really broken it down because not only do we break down the problem to understand the tools that we have available, we also began to think about the relationship between these things. And we got to the core question because it wasn't, some of you may have been trying to like think about like which one can you see which light is on, and that's almost the right question. And sometimes we do try to solve the easier question, but what we wanted to understand is we wanted an understanding of which switch controlled which light. We didn't have to see it was on. That was just kind of like a trick that we play on ourselves when we're trying to solve the problem quickly and easily. So we in this case, we found more tools available to us, and we solved the question that we actually wanted to question, not one that's adjacent to it and similar enough to work. So this is called the generic parts technique, and it's a systematic approach that was developed by Tony McCaffrey, and it is about breaking things down into their component parts. And as you begin to break them apart, you get a new view, and you begin to see the problem quite a bit differently. And this is a way that we can both think about the problems that are coming at us, but they also can help us in our process. So if we were to try to apply this to a real case scenario, we can imagine that we're working at a large ticket seller. And the challenge that's come to us is that we're being assigned to build a algorithm that's going to help find people the best seats. And as we do that, we might begin to break down, okay, well, bus seats, well, what does that really mean? What does the view mean for people? And what does proximity mean for people? What does viewing angle mean? What does the difference between $90 and $70? As we break down these questions, we really, break it down into these questions, we really come up with a solid set of questions that we can try to solve for the research itself. Some of these questions might become actually interview questions. And in the process, what we may do is we may identify within the collaboration group points of difference. We may find that one person believes that the viewing angle is not as important into proximity. And someone else may say, well, I actually think that like I would give up some viewing angle for a greater proximity. And as long as you can agree, like very specifically on the point on which you disagree, it's you believe that there's a trade-off, that one of these is more important than the other. But what you don't know is which one's kind of like more important, or how much more important is one. In case of the money, how much more important is something. So this is a great way to kind of like get people aligned on their disagreements. Is you've broken down, you kind of know specifically where people don't agree. You may even be thinking you're talking to each other the same way, but you know why you have a different point of view. And you can bring this into the research, and you can begin to ask the questions that you need of users and customers to really be able to kind of solve this puzzle. And then there's the kind of process of what you do after. And that's where I'd like to kind of introduce this idea of grounded theory. So you have these questions, you go out and you do research, and now what are you going to do with this information? Grounded theory is a process. It was started by Glaser and Strauss in the 60s, and it's really very similar. Some of you may know affinity mapping or cluster diagramming. I use both of those as part of my process, but those are very similar. And in my bastardized version of grounded theory, they're mechanisms that I use during it. So with grounded theory is what you do is you go out into the world and you collect data. And because this is like social science, it's really looking focused on the qualitative, even though you can still do this process with quantitative and even like lit reviews, whatever's needed for you to kind of like gather the data you need. But you go out to the world and you collect data, and you have the data you need for your research. And you have your notes, your documentations, maybe it's cameras, maybe it's photos, whatever it might be. And then in grounded theory, what you do is you start beginning to connect these dots, and you begin coding them so that way you have some kind of understanding of what things begin to group together, or what things have a relationship to each other. This might sound familiar to you because this is often what we do when we're doing affinity mapping. So we come into a room and we have all of our Post-it notes or index cards, and we begin to lay them out and begin to kind of like work with them to say, okay, these ideas are kind of similar. These things have a relationship to each other. And we begin to put them into under a label or into buckets or even like clusters, because it's sometimes referred to as clustering, and kind of create those. And when we have those, we can get a clear idea of like, okay, this is what's going on. And something I like to add to it, which is in some ways kind of like a cluster diagram, is I might take some ideas and begin to, if they have a relationship to each other, try to understand what that is. Is there a hierarchy? Are they two parts of it? It's kind of like going back to that generic parts technique. Can I break them apart? And it's kind of like the two aspects of it, and really just think through the pieces of it. And in grounded theory, what's great is what they suggest do is writing a memo. And sometimes I just do this in a couple paragraphs or a couple sentences, not paragraphs. I look at all my notes, and when you look at those notes, you and your team may really understand them because you've been in the room, but it's valuable to kind of maybe write that out. Like, what is you have these facts of things you saw, you kind of put them together in knowledge. And then if you begin to write them into a sentence, they can become an insight, or they can become something more that other people can understand and kind of like begin to consume. And with grounded theory, one of the things that are valuable is it's this idea of being able to, it's generating knowledge from the ground up. Instead of like proving or disproving hypotheses, it's generating it from the ground up, which also means if you go out and do additional research, you can begin to add things to it. And like maybe it is just additional content for the piece that you already have, but you may also begin to break down a piece out of it to say like, aha, now that I have some more insight on this, like these couple things here, they were actually something else. They weren't quite the same thing. So you can kind of break them apart a little bit. And what I really like about this is, when you do this, you can also really transfer these into slides pretty well. Maybe they become just a sentence summary and like an image of some sort or a diagram of some sort. And the additional value there is when you go into a room and you're presenting and questions come up or people kind of challenge and like want to know more, you've already written about it. You've already really digested what it means. So you can comfortably and reliably be able to respond to those questions and let people know why you came to the conclusions that you did. And it's not just coming off as this like anecdotal kind of thing that you're reaching for. You can really speak to, because you've written it out, you can speak to why you understand what you do. And then what we can do is I've offered grounded theory and generative generic parts technique, what we can do is we can actually begin to bring them together into a way that creates something more powerful and new. So you might remember that I was saying this idea of in insight and knowledge and kind of like facts and stuff. So when we think of some knowledge that we might have, it might be of a particular type. But if we kind of begin to use, like, apply this kind of group of knowledge that we have, if we begin to apply the generic parts technique, we might be able to take a little bit closer and say, okay, these are all kind of under the same cluster, but let's take a look at them again and see what's actually in here. And often what we kind of find is we have this other little nugget that was hiding right in plain sight. It just took a part of kind of like separating a little bit. Maybe it was a little bit similar. Like it was definitely similar, but it was hiding in plain sight. It was something that we just needed to tease out and break apart. So to make it easier, let me give a practical example. Imagine that you and your team are getting to do a new checkout flow. This is going to be a game changer. This is finally your team's bringing their vision into fruition. You have everybody behind you and you're ready to do it. So you begin to build it, and you start doing some testing with users. And what you find is people are just chugging along as you're doing your research and everything's going really well. And then there's a moment when people just seem to hit a wall. You know, like everyone seems to have this one wall where there's just like tons of frictions and anxiety and all these things. But your team, because you've been practicing these things, is on point, and they just deliver. They're executing. They're taking notes. They're thinking about this and kind of like pulling it all together to kind of like really understand what this problem is. And you now have this captured the information and you really turned it into knowledge. So you said, okay, here's all the things we've had, and you've really kind of clustered them around the problem that you kind of identified to kind of create like a body of knowledge. And when you're looking at a singular issue, you may think that like, here are all the things that are causing the problem, but you can also think about like what makes up the problem. What are the aspects of this? And part of it that you might notice is it's not just that they're hitting a wall. The reality is there were some issues with the UI. There was things that maybe it's the signifiers or some affordances just weren't delivering as we wanted. And even if we split these up a little bit, there's a little bit of it that's actually content. There's some of the content that was unclear. But these other things were emotional reactions. We had people talking about uncertainty, which is one thing. We had people talking about fear, which is another thing. And we can begin to like understand all these different parts. We have these feelings, thoughts, what they're seeing, what they're doing. And sometimes, and not always, these begin to become a very familiar tool, and we begin to understand that their thoughts, their feelings can be really broken down. Like what we thought was one problem, they're hitting the wall in this one spot. We can see that it's these different parts. Now, using these together, you're not always going to be able to get something like an empathy map, but you can see how you can take insights and then you can kind of break them into other ways and begin to understand that like, oh, like if we think about these differences, like what are the mechanical or like kind of like surface level things that maybe we can address in one way, but then what are these other emotional or like these other kind of pieces that need to be addressed in a different way? At the end of the day, I think that ideas alone are kind of a dozen. And even at that, like some people come up with really good ideas, but I've never seen an idea come out fully polished and ready to go. We're in an industry that thrives on continually kind of like learning and revamping and acting on the things that we learn and just trying to iterate and make a better kind of output on a regular basis. And if our best progress is to kind of come alive, we have to kind of be progressing together. We have to find ways where these changes and these chances that are going to be part of the process, that we're kind of doing it together and we're leveraging each other's strengths to hold us up and kind of move us forward, so that each little step we take, we're doing it together. And those little steps really, when they combine, they become leaps. And that's how we're going to move forward, is breaking those problems out. Like this is a very real way to zoom in and zoom out, but you're doing it as a group and you're kind of being systematic about it. And it doesn't mean everybody's doing it at the same point, but if everyone else is thinking the same way, they can be doing it at different points, and you almost get this kind of breathing effect of in and out. And you don't just have one person in the room and say, I'd like to take a step back. I've said it, everyone says it, but it's one of those things that you don't necessarily have to do. You can do it in really digestible and practical ways, like breaking it down and summing it up. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. I enjoyed putting this together, and I wish I could be in a room and actually sharing it with you live and in person, because it's something I really enjoy. If you're interested in picking up the conversation and having more of it, please get and talk to me. Until then, I hope you have a nice day. Take care. Bye.